Welcome to the Bringing the Human Back to Human Resources podcast. I'm Tracy Chernoff, and I've spent my entire professional career in HR. Each week, we'll explore the delicate balance between people and business with the aim to reconnect the two and create meaningful outcomes. Listen in as I share my own experiences, challenge the status quo, and chat with guests from various industries about our mission to bring the human back to human resources. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here for another week. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. Share this with a friend. Whatever you want to do to spread the word about this podcast, I appreciate it. I have a super exciting topic for us this week, and with this topic comes an amazing guest. So with me this week, I have Mihaela Berciu, and she is an amazing guest to have on. She is going to talk to us all about how we can focus on preventing burnout, but also what it means to be too busy and why we're so focused on this. So let me introduce you to Mihaela. Using her core values model, Mihaela has worked with and advises board members, top-level managers, angel investors, and senior professionals seeking to excel in their careers and improve performance to drive even greater success. Her client portfolio ranges from banking, financial consulting, pharmaceuticals, FMCGs, retail, fashion, television, aviation services, and more. She received her executive coaching certification from Cambridge University, an MBA from the American University in London, and studied psychology of mind and theory of knowledge at Oxford University. She was also the host of a national TV show viewed by hundreds of thousands and is the author of 2 best-selling books, Dress for Success and Success is in the Details. Her mission is to get leaders to experience their excellence by exploring values, understanding aspirations, removing barriers, and visualizing the path to their personal and professional success. So without further ado, welcome to the podcast, Mihaela. We're so excited to have you.
Thank you, Tracy. Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I personally can't wait to get into this topic because I am someone who always has to be busy. And I feel like the article that you sent me when we first spoke, I was reading a lot about myself. And I know that I'm not alone in this. I know that many of the listeners are in this bucket where, there's always this kind of constant need to feel busy, feel productive, and without really thinking about, well, what does that mean? What lesson does that tell? So before we kind of get into that, can you walk us through the kind of like the concept that this is and where you started to think through what it means or what the hidden need is to be busy and what that is?
Well, I was no exception. Like most people today, I was doing it all. I was a single mother. I was running 2 businesses, started a third one, traveling for work, everything. Being there for friends, for family. There was not a one moment, for me to actually stop and think of me, and if there was a moment, I would definitely find something to fill it up with, anything else but stop and think about everything that was going on. And as it most often happens, unfortunately, I was forced to stop when my body decided enough is enough. And I was diagnosed with burnout, with chronic fatigue of the adrenal glands. And I really had to, take a step back and understand that my health is actually more important than anything else if I was to do Absolutely. All that I was doing. And I got to thinking. By then I was already a coach, and most of my clients were also very busy people. And I realized that this being so busy is a need to prove ourselves, is a need to make ourselves important in front of us, and give us value. And so I started digging even deeper, and I realized that there are a lot of emotional blockages and a lot of limiting and false beliefs, that the only way we would be appreciated is if we would do it all. It wasn't. I can't say it was a very easy and pleasant journey to understand where it was all coming from for me. But it was definitely worth doing the work, and it was definitely very rewarding doing the work. And I'm now in a place where I'm probably more efficient than I've ever been, and I probably work less than half the time I used to work. And what's even more exciting for me is that if I feel tired, or if I feel, okay, you know what, I need a day for myself, I can take that day without feeling guilty about it, and without feeling any shame that I need the day. And I think that's probably the greatest win at the end of that journey. Yeah, that's how it all started.
I think that's amazing. I mean, my mind was running a million miles a minute as you were speaking. So I'm going to try and only ask one question rather than the five questions that I have at the top of my mind.
One at
Um,
a time.
One at a time, right? Exactly. So the first question, which I was reflecting on, because I remember in what you had shared with me that there's this idea of people need me, which means I'm important. I solve problems, which means I'm smart. I take care of everyone, which means I'm needed. And in reflecting on what you were saying and in reflecting on those concepts, it made me think about how like business is structured today. That, most of the time there's like this top down type of approach to business, and the executive or the leadership team has to be involved in everything. They have to be involved in every single decision, which sometimes eliminates the opportunity for someone beneath them to feel empowered. It kind of like cuts off a piece of that person's ability because they are not needed as much. So, is there a balance between like the way that we grow and scale in our companies or in our careers, and the way that we can also not overly contribute ourselves to solving problems, for example, so that we are empowering people? I hope that question makes sense. In my mind, I'm like, it makes sense to
Yeah.
me, but I don't know.
It does. It does. Unfortunately, the pressures, of today's business world, create a lot of leading from fear, and that's why top leadership teams feel the need to be very involved in day to day decisions and day to day operations. The bad thing about that is that creates, like you said, apart from the fact that it cuts off a part of how useful employees could be, people in the company could be. It disengages them, and once people are disengaged, it's impossible to motivate them. And when I talk about motivation, I don't talk about money motivation, because money motivation is never a long-term solution. Money motivation only works like very, very short term, the expectation to get it, but then the excitement to get it, and then after the first salary, when more money come into your bank account, from the second one it's expected to be like that, so the motivation is gone. I'm talking about the motivation to grow, the motivation to bring your best self to work, the motivation to contribute, to innovate, to help, to help the company individually and collectively to grow. So and unfortunately I see that a bit too often. And But going back to what I said at the beginning of this answer is, leading from fear is never successful. Is Yes, it might lead to some good numbers but then even that is temporary, because you start having a lot of hidden costs when your teams are not efficient, they're not productive, or people leave, so you have a high turnover of good stuff. Plus, then your reputation of the reputation of the company starts to suffer, and you start attracting less and less excellent candidates. So once you understand that, that would be the first step, to understand leading from fear. And you only lead from fear when there is a lower belief in self, and there is lower self-worth. Because if you're confident, then there is no fear. And when you're confident, you deal differently with pressure. And the way you lead and the way you interact with people is through that confidence, is from a place of positivity, is not from a place of negativity. And when that happens, trust is built. And when you build trust with the people you work with, they will give you everything. And because feeling and knowing you're trusted and appreciated is basically all we need to be motivated and to give our best. So if you realize you lead from fear, you need to take a step back and ask, okay, why am I feeling insecure?
Mm. That is great advice. And I have been hearing this a lot more recently, this thought process and ideology around leading through fear and what the implications are. I'm having someone on the podcast, whether this episode is probably going to be before that episode comes out. But one of the things that she talks about is how leading through fear negatively impacts teams, which is really underpinning what you are sharing. And so it makes me think about how sometimes we see, especially as HR professionals, we see before the leader affects the team negatively, because sometimes it takes a little bit of time, that this leadership through fear can sometimes look like taking everything on and not delegating, because there's a fear of, whether it's because of the lack of trust or a fear that they're going to do a better job and that their team is not going to do as great a job. And sometimes on the opposite end of things, we see leaders totally overrun by their teams. So I guess I would love to know from your perspective how HR leaders can identify when maybe their support is needed, when they have to like get into a conversation with a leader to say, hey, like, let's focus on your intention here. What are your goals? And let's make sure that you are leading with confidence and that you feel good about what you're doing so that we can build up the team. Like, what do they have to look for?
Definitely look for signs of disengagement from the team, because whether both the examples you gave of behaviors of leaders would definitely impact the team equally negative. Because a team that does a lot but doesn't have that guidance from a leader, that instills a lot of fear in them. What if I'm, am I doing the right thing? What if I'm making the wrong decisions? What if, and also they feel they have to do the job of their leader. And so of course that will create a lot of frustration. And this engagement takes many forms, but it's quite easy to start noticing. Is apart from the daily demeanor of people, they tend to come a bit late, 5-10 minutes late. They definitely don't smile at all or as much. They don't engage with others. They tend to be much more focused on sitting at their desk, just getting through the day, and then going home. So there are a lot of signs that you see there. And the minute you start seeing these signs, you should HR should start interacting with them and then approaching the leader, but from the very beginning. Ideally, this should be like, it shouldn't get there. Ideally, HR should be paying attention all the time to see the balance of engagement and motivation, and how the leader is acting, and how confident they appear to act.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And actually, a lot of the times we see HR leaders in this situation because there are, most of the time, HR professionals tend to start out their careers as individual contributors. And so they don't have necessarily the same experience in growing and managing a team. And then, the most of the time when someone wants to grow into an HR role that is leading and managing, they go from like not managing anyone to managing a full team. And there can be a lot of like the push and pull and tension there because there, it's a skill set that hasn't been developed. So I'm sure that some of the listeners potentially are looking inward as you share this information too. And actually, that's kind of where I want to pivot. I know that in your what you sent me, you have this article about the hidden need behind being busy. And you talk about how your self-worth was dependent on others, on external factors, and this like unsustainable measure of how you felt good and how you felt valued and successful. How did you break that mold? Because I'm sure 99% of us are measuring our success based on what someone else is telling us.
Well, it all comes back to self-worth and how we appreciate ourselves. Sadly, and it's not something that my generation went through. It's something that is perpetuating. Kids being brought up are not taught to self appreciate and to build their self-worth. To the contrary, they're constantly compared to others. They're constantly nowadays I think it's actually a bit worse, because when I was growing up, you would only get a medal, or you would only get a prize if it was the first three, and you really, if you that would help you to understand, well, why am I not in the first three? What am I doing wrong? And that process could help to an extent, to start self-assessing. Whereas today, kids get diplomas for participation regardless, regardless whether they are the first or the last, and that's a bit confusing for them, because on one hand they do get a diploma, so they do get acknowledgement, but at the same time, they aren't really appreciated because they didn't really perform that well. So that's even more confusing when it comes to self-assessment and to understanding where you're at, and do you need to up your game? Do you need to what kind of support do you need, to and there are a few more other things that are going on, which I think are more detrimental to growing into confident adults that appreciate their true self-worth. Because I strongly believe we are all exceptional people. It's just that there are too many layers of self-doubt and comparison and negativity that block our excellence to show. But that's what it really. And until you really appreciate yourself, and until you do the inner work to remove all the blockages, emotional blockages that you pick up along the way, and which create these filters where you're not filters that are limiting, where how you see the world and how you receive the messages from the world are altered by these filters. So until you clear these filters, you will always be dependent on the appreciation of others and this external validation, because you don't trust yourself. You're not confident enough to trust your decision, to trust your knowledge, to trust that you can learn what you don't know, and to have this very objective self-assessment that will always help you to progress. Until that happens, validation will have to come from the outside world, and then you are 100% dependent on that, and that's not a happy place to be.
Yeah. I am, this is definitely sinking in. I think that a lot of the listeners are going to really benefit from hearing this. And it makes me think actually about this like remote world that we're in. Like you and I are recording a podcast from our own homes potentially, and from our own environments and across the world. And when we think about that, the way that the world has scaled, it makes me think about the way that business needs to scale with alongside the world. So in saying that, I guess the picture I'll paint is that as we were talking about how we can better enjoy our work, how we can, focus on, instead of being more busy, building more trust and doing things that, make us more productive, not necessarily more busy. How have you seen business adapt to the way the world has changed? I mean, we talk about it all the time on the podcast that, HR has changed tremendously. Business has changed in terms of how we provide people different resources and benefits, that most people are not working necessarily full time in an office anymore. So how do some of these things, how has business changed, and how do some of these things have to change in order to better ready ourselves to be our most productive, but not necessarily our busiest? If your company is remote or hybrid, then you know just how difficult it can be to grow your company's culture beyond a pre-scheduled Zoom happy hour or occasional lunch and learn. Well, this week's sponsor is here to solve that. They're called CultureBot. CultureBot has devised what will likely become the gold standard for growing and blossoming a company culture inside of Slack. The app is like a sidekick for any HR or people professional, automating a lot of the mundane tasks you probably are forgetting to do on a daily basis. Things like birthday and work anniversary celebrations, team shoutouts and kudos, employee introductions, and remote games. It even has health and wellness tips and conversation starters. If that piques your interest, this will get you even more excited. Today, I'm able to share a special promotion for listeners of the podcast. You can get your first 6 months of CultureBot for 50% off. Plus, if your team is under 25 employees, CultureBot is free forever. So if you're looking for a way to create a culture of appreciation and drive increased engagement and togetherness across your team, I definitely recommend checking out CultureBot. Go to getculturebot.com/humanhr. That's getculturebot.com/humanhr to get the offer. Plus, I've added the link in the show notes so you can just click right there. Now, let's get back to the podcast.
Before I answer your question, I would like to just pick on the beginning and the end of your question, which is how do we make ourselves more productive? We are productive when we stop or limit overthinking, because overthinking is our biggest enemy. Overthinking keeps us into a spiral that will always work against us. Overthinking is like a drill, if you want. The more you drill, the further down it goes, and the further down it goes, the darker it is. And because it goes, the deeper it goes, the darker it gets. And it's the same with overthinking. The deeper we go, and the faster we go into spiraling into questioning everything about ourselves, the darker the place will be, and the stronger the self-doubt, and the stronger the feeling of powerlessness and uselessness, and it's very draining, both physically and mentally and emotionally, actually, and that makes us very inefficient, because instead of having clarity of mind, having confidence, knowing that even if the decision we've made maybe won't play out the best, it doesn't matter. We'll know what to do. We'll know how to deal with it. We have the strength to take the responsibility, to ask for help, to ask, the collaboration of people around us. But that is limited because we're too busy in our minds overthinking everything. And I think that with everything that's been going on in the world in the last 2 years and the rise of remote working, although it does have some benefits, like you mentioned, that we can have this conversation, being on different continents. But when it comes to businesses, I think it's a very delicate balance, because we are social beings. Human beings are social beings. Even the most introverted of people still benefit from some kind of human direct interaction, not just through a screen. And there are more and more studies actually that come out showing that productivity is going down now. Productivity was high at the beginning of the pandemic, when we were forced into remote working, because it was new, because it was exciting, it was good it was almost like everybody wished for, to be at home and work from home and manage their own time, and spend more time with the kids or with the pet or whatever. But as time has passed and we got used to this, studies show that on one hand, people started getting a bit more distracted by, oh, let me just put another load of wash, and then, which absolutely interrupts the flow of work, the flow of efficiency and productivity. Others feel lonely, and they just start, even there's people who started at a confident place, and now they're starting to question how good they are, because they don't sometimes even just bouncing an idea with the colleague next desk, and they saying, yeah, that's a good idea, that's enough to keep your self-confidence going, and to have these check-ins every now and again, which is much harder if you have to actually dial, or and that person maybe is busy with something else, and it's, you can interrupt someone at a desk next to you, but if they don't want to pick up the phone,
They don't have to.
you're not gonna exactly you're
Right.
not gonna get your answer. So and also it goes back to what I was saying, because people are remote, they start filling up their calendars with meetings and participating in meetings and in things they actually don't need to do, but because they're remote, they have to show they're busy.
Right.
And whereas in the office, you don't have to have, a meeting every hour in the calendar, because people see you're there. You're clearly working. Whereas if you're away, you have to make an even bigger effort to prove that you're busy and you're doing, you're working, which sometimes you end up working longer than you would have worked in the office. So what we and people, they were excited about the fact that they gained the commuting, the drive, or the whatever, however way they would get to the office, and they saw that as a win. But it's not a win, because in reality, those times were and are very useful to break the day and to change your mindset. I'm leaving home, I'm getting into the mindset of work. I think of, okay, what do I need to do when I get to the office? And you start, you're already getting yourself in that work mode. And when you finish, you start getting yourself into the home, or whatever, private personal life mode, where you start disconnecting from the stress of work and from everything that was going on, and you can actually enjoy life. Whereas when you're working from home and you leave your personal life at home, you don't have these times, and everything gets too blended and too blurred.
This is fascinating. I didn't realize how impactful, some mostly negatively, the appearance of being busy can be, because as you were sharing that because of where we are today with remote work, that there's this um, need or feeling that there's a need to look and appear busy when at home. We know that there was like this huge surge in people purchasing mouse jigglers so that on
Yeah,
like Teams or Slack or Zoom or wherever, it would say that you're active. I can say
yeah.
I don't believe in that. Like I don't. If someone is concerned with me being away for 30 minutes, we've got bigger issues. But at the end of the day, this is like a resounding theme across the world that
Yeah,
people, there's
yeah.
this
And it's happening.
insecurity, and it's happening. Yeah, and
Yeah,
it is happening. And there are
yeah.
people, we know that there are businesses that are closely monitoring people's time at
Mm,
work, which I also don't agree with. I'm pretty open about this. I think there's obviously a huge negative connotation there. But as you were sharing this, I was thinking about how when people use their calendars to appear busy, then others who need to tap the shoulder of that person to get some information then say, oh my gosh, this person's too busy for me. I can't reach this person. And it
mm.
slows down the actual movement of the organization. It slows down the progress of projects. And I did not ever put that together.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly, and that's why there are a lot of companies, at least in Europe. I don't know exactly what's happening in the States, but in Europe, more and more companies encourage people to come back to work in the office at least 3 days, 3 days a week. So that they still can work from home 1 or 2 days, but being in the office, they realized you can get a lot more done. People are more efficient, and also they feel more connected.
Mm. My first thought is, well, how do we do that while ensuring that people have flexibility and self-determination over their schedules? I know that especially in the UK and New Zealand and some other parts of the world, there have been studies and trials into a 4-day work week, and that this is kind
Yeah,
of like the next phase of flexibility and, like the new frontier for work. But I still feel like, well, why not leave it up to the person? So do you have like thoughts on this, or have you seen where it's successful if someone or a business says you can decide what works for you and that it kind of works perfectly, or have you seen the opposite?
I've seen a mix of that, and it depends. It very much depends on the roles as well, because it would be ideal if people could work with their body clocks, and I was never a morning person until I had my children, and then I became a morning person by default, and not necessarily by choice, but I had to. But the minute I didn't have to wake up anymore when they finished school, and I didn't have to wake up anymore, at like 6, 5:30, 6 a.m. to prepare breakfast and get them ready for school and all of that, I've immediately, reversed to my natural way of waking up a bit later, but having, being able to work a bit later as well. But I'm lucky because I'm in charge of my own schedule, and I can work my way, around. And of course, I can also wake up very early if I have to, and do whatever I need to do. But I know I'm not as productive if I have to wake up every day at 6 o'clock. So it would be great if we get to the point where we could do that, but it's not always possible. And there are roles where you can allow people, to come a bit later in the office and stay later, and but it's tricky, building a culture where everybody feels happy and included and seen, heard, and respected is a lot trickier than it sounds, because then, if something, it's all good until people get along, but if there is some kind of conflict happening, then they immediately start turning and saying, oh yes, but how come he can or she can come at 10? How do I know they stay until 7? Because I leave at 5:30. And so it's a very delicate balance, but I do agree that it would be great if we could work more with natural rhythms, that rather than impose certain certain
Right. Yeah, I definitely am a believer in full flexibility and autonomy. I think if I were to be required to work in an office today, I probably would not stick with that job, because as much as like I love getting ready and wearing like my nice clothes and going somewhere to an office or to see and socialize and see colleagues, I also personally would never want to have that imposition again, because there's so much value
I
that I
agree.
place on flexibility. So, but then there
I
are
agree. And
people, yeah,
sorry to interrupt,
no,
because
please.
there's another thing. If businesses would build the trust in their employees, sorry, to move to working with tasks and goals, and allow the people, to make their own schedules in a way that they know we have to achieve this by the end of next week, instead of them having to be 8 hours in an office to make sure that is achieved, and be allowed to work around their own devices, is probably would be a lot more efficient, rather than this strict 8 hour days,
For
or
sure.
whatever it is.
For
And
sure.
I've noticed a big shift in productivity in myself when I switched from having to have a busy calendar to, okay, what do I want to achieve, what do I want to do this week? By the end of the week, what are my, tasks? And it was a magical shift, because I could work one day for 8 hours, the next day 3 hours, and then take a day off, and then, come back and do everything I needed to do. And at the end of the week, I achieved everything, because I was
Mm-hmm.
much more applied when I was working. So yeah, I totally agree with you that flexibility and autonomy can be, but for that to be achieved, I think the way we work, and the way we see how we measure effectiveness and productivity should change.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the only thing that I would add is that there, of course, there are some people who want to be in an office 100% of the time. And businesses also have to be able to provide that. Like, how do you, whether it's someone working for a company that actually requires that, or if it's a business that enables, some sort of like working, options for that person to be able to be in person. I think it's all about how the business can accommodate as many people as possible. You can never make everyone happy, but we have to do the best that we can.
And also, it starts with what we were discussing at the beginning of our conversation, the self-confidence of the leaders, of the top leadership team, because if they are confident and they build the trust with their teams, then that can be achieved. But if they lead from fear, there's no way they would trust someone who's not in the office, and who, by the way, could easily be in the office and do something completely different, and not be engaged, not be present, but because they're there,
Right.
the leadership team feels comfortable because they're there.
Right. Absolutely. And I really like what you brought up about trust. And I know we've talked about it a few times throughout this episode, but I definitely kind of want to come back to this because trust is like single handedly the hardest thing to build. And especially it's hard to build with remote teams because you might not have ever met someone that you have to trust now. And there's so much more intention that has to go into building trust when you're remote, but really in general, whether you're remote or not, building trust is the most important thing that needs to come out of a working relationship. What are some like tips and tricks that you have for listeners to be able to build trust or rebuild trust if trust has been broken within their team or within their organization? Because the answer can't always be to leave and find a new thing.
Well, trust is definitely a very tricky thing. And what I found out, and what the advice that I would give, or a tip, is if we understand that trust actually comes with expectations, uh, it changes the whole dynamic, because just because I have an expectation of you and you don't necessarily comply with that expectation, or you don't fulfill that expectation, it doesn't mean I shouldn't trust you. It means that maybe I set the wrong expectations. And if I can own that, if I can accept that the expectations that I set are not your the expectation. Let me see how to put it. The expectations that I set are my expectations of you, and you are not responsible to fulfill my expectations. You're responsible to do whatever you think is right to do. And if your work is done with integrity, and you're delivering to the best of your knowledge and expertise, then I need to be very aware that I might be setting myself for failure in our relationship by setting all the wrong expectations. So, and that comes down to communication. If, especially with remote working, but it goes in any kind of relationship, it's all about communication. So before agreeing on a task and a deadline and everything, uh, it's important to discuss, how do you see this happening? What do you think can be delivered? Are my expectations of what can be delivered aligned with yours? Am I crazy? I might be crazy thinking it can be done in like 2 hours.
Right.
For some people, time is relative. And
Yes. Yeah.
for some people really lack the ability of appreciating correctly the time that it needs, to deliver something. And you can see that, that the most common thing is, if you ask someone, how long do you think it takes me to walk from here, to there? And they'll just say something like 10 minutes, and you're like, oh, okay, great. And you go, and it's like half an hour, 45 minutes. And you're like, well, what did just happen?
Right.
And then if you tell them, well, how was that 10 minutes for you? And they're like, oh, is it 40 minutes almost? Oh my God. I
Yeah.
didn't realize it's that long.
Right.
So discussing all of this, and aligning expectations, it will build trust. But if my expectations, I set my trust based on my expectations, and you set your trust based on your expectations, if it's not delivered how I expect it, I'll lose trust in you, and you will lose trust in me, because you'll think she's completely mad. There's no way this can be done. I can't trust her. I can't trust her with this decision. I can't trust her to understand what's going on. So communication is the key, I think, in building and maintaining trust in any aspect of our life, but more so at work, where you need to constantly, deliver various tasks.
Yeah, it's a really great point. That analogy was so spot on that, you could say one thing, the other person perceives it another way. They have their own expectations that they haven't communicated. And then now you're walking a 30-minute walk that you thought was 10 minutes. I mean, it's really the perfect analogy. And I think that advice around like how we are communicating and trusting but verifying that information was received the way we intended it to be received. I mean, communication is really hard too. It's really hard. And I would say like 9 times out of 10, people are struggling with either communication or trust. And I think it's really clear based on what you've shared that you can't have trust without some focus on clear communication because of that obvious breakdown. So I really appreciate what you've shared there.
Yeah, alignment of understandings is crucial in
Yeah.
in any kind of interaction, but especially when building and maintaining trust.
Absolutely. Well, Mihaela, thank you so much for joining the podcast and for sharing all of this wisdom. I personally have a lot to take back with me. My mind is running a million miles a minute because I'm too busy. And I also have such expectations sometimes. And I'm realizing now that there is a huge difference between my expectations and someone else's expectations for themselves. And I hope that all of the listeners are paying as much attention to this conversation as I have, because it can really change the way that people interact with one another and lead teams, whether they have a team themselves that they manage or not.
Yeah, and themselves.
And themselves, exactly. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Where can everyone find
Thank
you?
Tracy.
And where can everyone find you and connect and learn more?
I'm on all social media, all the, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, and with my name, full name, Mihaela Berciu, and my website is mihaelaberciu.com.
Amazing. Well, I will be sure to link everything in the show notes so it's easy for the listeners. And I thank you so much for joining us. If you have any more revelations, let me know so we can bring you back on and talk through those as well.
Thank you very much. I love to come back. I enjoyed chatting to you. I love your questions. So
thank you.
Yeah, I thank you so much for having me.
Yes, of course. Hey, just before you go, don't forget to subscribe to this show so that you are the first to hear when an episode drops each week. And maybe leave a 5-star review and a comment about how much you loved this episode. Plus, if you have someone in mind who would really enjoy this episode, make sure you share it with them. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you next week.